In a bustling supermarket in the heart of the city, a hard-working black employee helps an elderly man find the item he needs. But that small act of kindness enrages the manager, a man drunk on power and blinded by prejudice. Without hesitation, he fires her on the spot, but, as tension reaches its peak, the elderly man reveals his true identity. Someone with enough power to change everything. And now the situation is about to take a shocking turn. The early morning sun cast a golden glow over the city, painting long shadows across the quiet streets. Inside Green Mart, the fluorescent lights hummed softly, illuminating rows upon rows of neatly stacked shelves. It was a massive supermarket, one of the biggest in town, with aisles stretching endlessly and the constant murmur of customers drifting through the air. The scent of fresh produce mixed with the faint aroma of cardboard boxes being unpacked, signaling the start of another bustling workday. Naomi adjusted her uniform, a simple green polo shirt with the Green Mart logo embroidered on the chest, and pulled her thick curls into a tight bun. She had worked here for almost a year now, balancing her shifts with night classes at a local community college. Her small apartment, a cozy but modest space on the city's outskirts, was barely within her means, and every paycheck counted. But she never complained. She had dreams, big ones. She could already see it, a small warm bakery filled with the scent of cinnamon and fresh bread, people lining up for her handmade pastries, the laughter of children as they pressed their noses against the glass display. It was a vision that kept her moving, even on the hardest days. Today was just another ordinary shift. She pushed a cart loaded with boxes down aisle 7, methodically restocking the shelves with canned goods. The supermarket was coming to life. Shoppers wandered in, some rushing, others taking their time, reading labels, comparing prices. The overhead speakers played a soft, unremarkable tune, blending into the background noise. As Naomi knelt to arrange the lower shelves, she caught sight of an elderly white man standing near the cereal section. He was dressed in a neatly pressed brown coat, a wool hat perched atop his head, and a pair of glasses that kept slipping down his nose. He held a wrinkled grocery list in one hand, his other trembling slightly as he squinted at the shelves. His pale blue eyes darted between the boxes, confusion etched into the lines of his aged face. Naomi had seen him before, a regular customer. She recalled him moving slowly through the aisles on previous visits, always polite, always a little lost. Today, though, he seemed particularly troubled. His lips pressed into a thin line, his shoulders tense, as if the sheer number of choices before him was overwhelming. Without hesitation, Naomi stood and approached him with a warm smile. "Hey there, sir. Need a hand finding something?" The old man blinked, startled at first, but then his face softened with relief. "Oh, bless you, dear, these aisles get bigger every time I come in," he chuckled weakly, shaking his head. "I have a list here, but my eyes aren't what they used to be." He held up the crumpled piece of paper, the writing shaky but legible. Naomi took the list and scanned it quickly. "Basic groceries, nothing fancy." "I got you," she said cheerfully. "Let's tackle this together." Walter, his name was written in careful, looping letters at the top of the list, watched her with gratitude as she effortlessly navigated the aisle, picking out the right brands, double-checking the items. As they moved from shelf to shelf, they talked. He asked her about school, about her job, and she found herself sharing more than she expected. She told him about her dream of opening a bakery, about how she spent her nights perfecting recipes, about the way baking felt like home, like something she was meant to do. Walter listened intently, nodding along, his kind expression never wavering. "You remind me of my late wife," he mused at one point. "She used to bake the most wonderful pies. Said baking was her way of spreading a little joy." He smiled wistfully, then patted Naomi's hand. "You keep that fire, young lady. Don't let anyone tell you you can't." Naomi felt a swell of warmth in her chest. It wasn't often that people, especially strangers, validated her dreams. Most of the time, when she told people what she wanted to do, they just nodded politely or offered skeptical looks. But Walter's words felt genuine, and for a moment the weight of her daily struggles felt a little lighter. But the moment was cut short. A sharp voice sliced through the air like a whip. "Naomi, what the hell are you doing?" The warmth in her chest vanished instantly. She turned to see Hank, her manager, storming toward her, his expression twisted with irritation. Hank was a tall, broad-shouldered man with slicked-back hair and a permanent scowl. He had never liked Naomi. She could feel it in the way he watched her, in the way he spoke to her, always curt, always condescending. He never outright said anything, but she knew. She had seen that look before. Naomi started, but Hank didn't let her finish. "This is a workplace, not a damn social club," he snapped, his voice loud enough for several nearby customers to glance over. "You think we're paying you to chit-chat with customers?" Naomi's stomach clenched. She felt the heat of embarrassment creeping up her neck, but she stood her ground. "I was helping Mr. Walter find his groceries." "I don't care," Hank interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "You're here to work, not to make friends. And don't pull the helping the old man excuse. I don't care if he's the goddamned president. Your job is to keep those shelves stocked." Walter bristled beside her. "Young man, there's no need for that tone," he said firmly. She was being kind, something I imagine you don't encounter often. Hank barely spared Walter a glance. His attention was fixed solely on Naomi, his expression growing darker. "Don't talk back to me," he warned. "Consider this your final warning." Naomi clenched her fists, swallowing back the anger rising in her chest. She had worked too hard to let someone like Hank belittle her, but she also couldn't afford to lose this job. Walter, however, was staring at Hank now with an unreadable expression, and though Naomi didn't know it yet, something was about to shift, something that would change everything. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest, a steady rhythm of anger and frustration threatening to spill over. She had done nothing wrong. Helping a customer, especially an elderly one, was part of the job, wasn't it? But Hank wasn't interested in reason. He stood there, his broad frame blocking her path, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, as if he was daring her to push back. She could feel the weight of his authority pressing down on her, suffocating, reminding her of an unspoken truth she had learned long ago. People like him always expected people like her to stay in their place. Walter shifted beside her, his brows furrowing, his pale blue eyes darkening with something Naomi could only describe as disappointment. He had been watching the exchange closely, his grip tightening around the handle of his shopping cart. "Young man," he said again, his voice steady but firm, "I don't appreciate the way you're speaking to her." Hank let out a sharp, humorless laugh, his lips curling in a smirk. "And I don't appreciate my employees wasting company time," he shot back, leveling Naomi with a glare. "This isn't charity work. If you can't follow basic instructions, maybe this isn't the right job for you." Naomi inhaled deeply, steadying herself, refusing to let him see how much his words stung. This wasn't the first time he had tried to make her feel small, to remind her that no matter how hard she worked, he still saw her as nothing more than a replaceable cog in the machine. But this time, she wasn't just going to stand there and take it. "I was doing my job," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Walter needed help, and I helped him. That's what we're supposed to do here, isn't it?" Hank's jaw tensed, his eyes flickered around the store, noticing the few customers now watching the scene unfold. He didn't like being challenged, especially not in front of an audience. His face darkened, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower, quieter, but laced with cold authority. "You don't get to decide how this store is run, I do. And I'm telling you, if you can't follow directions, you're done here." Naomi felt her stomach drop. The weight of those words settled over her like a stone. She needed this job. She needed the paycheck, the stability. But at that moment, as she stared into Hank's eyes, she realized that no amount of money could make up for the way he was trying to humiliate her. Walter must have sensed it too, because he suddenly straightened, pushing his cart aside as if preparing to take a stand. His voice was steel now, no longer just a concerned customer, but something more. "That's enough," he said, his presence commanding in a way that made Hank's smirk falter for the first time. But Hank wasn't finished. His lips twisted, and then he scoffed, shaking his head. "You know what? Forget it. Naomi, you're fired." The words rang in the air, sharp and final. Naomi barely had time to process them before the full weight of the moment crashed down on her. She had just lost her job, just like that. For a brief second, the store fell into silence. Then Walter spoke, And his next words changed everything. "No," he said simply, his voice calm but edged with power. "She's not." Hank's brow furrowed in confusion. "Excuse me?" Walter exhaled slowly, straightening his shoulders, and when he looked at Hank again his expression had shifted into something unreadable. "You really don't recognize me, do you?" Naomi blinked, glancing between them, sensing a shift in the air. She had no idea what was about to happen, but she could feel the energy in the room shifting. Something was coming. Hank scoffed. "I don't care who you are, old man." Walter tilted his head slightly, a flicker of disappointment flashing across his face. "I figured as much," he murmured, before leveling Hank with a stare so sharp it could have cut through steel. And then, in a voice that was neither loud nor boastful, he spoke the words that made Hank's smirk vanish instantly. "I own this store." For a moment the store seemed to freeze. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant chatter of customers, even the faint beep of cash registers at the front, it all faded into silence as Hank stared at Walter, his expression shifting from irritation to confusion, and then, finally, to something resembling fear. The words hung in the air, weighty and immovable. "I own this store." Naomi felt her breath catch. She looked at Walter, then back at Hank, watching as realization crashed over the manager like a tidal wave. His face twitched, his mouth opening and closing as if struggling to find the right response. "You're... what?" Hank stammered, his voice suddenly lacking the sharp edge it had carried just moments ago. Walter adjusted his coat, his movements slow and deliberate. "Walter Reynolds, founder and majority owner of Green Mart," he said evenly, his gaze never wavering from Hank's face. "I like to visit my stores from time to time, see how things are running, and today I happen to witness something I don't ever want to see under my roof again." Hank's face drained of color. His hands, which had been clenched at his sides, loosened as panic settled into his features. His eyes darted around as if searching for an escape, but there was none. The few nearby customers who had stopped to watch were now murmuring amongst themselves, their curious glances turning into knowing looks. "Mr. Reynolds," Hank started, his voice suddenly softer, almost pleading, I didn't know. If I had realized who you were." Walter cut him off with a sharp shake of his head. "That's exactly the problem," he said. "You didn't know who I was, so you thought you could get away with treating her like this. Tell me, Hank, if I wasn't the owner, if I was just another customer, would you have cared what I had to say?" Hank swallowed hard. He opened his mouth, perhaps to lie, but the weight of Walter's stare pinned him in place. "I've been in this business a long time," Walter continued, his voice calm but unwavering. "I built Green Mart from the ground up, and I did it by hiring people who respect the values of this company, hard work, integrity, and above all, decency. What I saw today was the opposite of that." He let the words sink in before adding, "So tell me, Hank, if my employees are supposed to follow directions and I'm the one in charge, what does that mean for you?" Hank's breath hitched. He understood exactly what was happening, but he still clung to some desperate hope that he could salvage the situation. "Mr. Reynolds, please," he said quickly, his voice turning oily with forced humility. I overreacted. I can fix this. I made a mistake, but we don't have to do anything drastic, right?" He let out a weak chuckle, trying to mask the rising panic in his tone. "Let's be reasonable here." Walter's eyes hardened. Firing a good employee in front of customers because she was helping someone? "That's not just a mistake, that's a judgment, and from where I'm standing it was a bad one," he exhaled, then spoke the words that sent a ripple through the air. "We don't need managers like you in my stores. You're fired." Hank's mouth fell open, his entire body going rigid. For a second he looked like he might argue, but the words never came. He could see it in Walter's face. There was no room for negotiation. No second chances. The realization hit him like a brick wall. He had just lost everything. No, wait," Hank stammered, taking a step forward, his voice rising slightly. You can't do this. I've worked here for years. I know this store better than anyone. Who's going to run it if I—" Walter's expression didn't change. "Not my problem." The words landed like a final blow, and Hank staggered back, his face contorted with disbelief. His eyes darted to Naomi for a split second, just long enough for her to see something flicker across his face. It wasn't remorse. It wasn't even embarrassment. It was resentment. Even now, after everything, he still blamed her. Naomi met his gaze, but she didn't flinch. She had spent too long swallowing her anger, too long keeping her head down, but now she stood taller. She wasn't the one who had been wrong here, and she wasn't about to apologize for simply existing in a space that Hank thought she didn't belong in. Hank clenched his jaw, his fingers twitching at his sides. He looked as if he wanted to say something, but in the end he just turned sharply on his heel and stormed away, pushing through the automatic doors without another word. Silence followed his departure, thick and heavy. For a moment, no one spoke. Then finally Walter turned to Naomi. She expected a lot of things in that moment: pity, concern, maybe even an apology on behalf of his former manager. But what she saw in his expression was something different. Prided. "You kept your composure," he said simply. Naomi exhaled, only now realizing how tense her shoulders had been. "I didn't have much of a choice." Walter chuckled, shaking his head. "No, you did have a choice. You could have backed down. You could have let him push you around. But you didn't." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded to himself as if making a decision. "I could use someone like you in a leadership role." Naomi blinked. "What?" Walter smiled. "How would you like to be the new manager of this store?" Naomi stood frozen, her mind struggling to catch up with the words that had just left Walter's mouth. "How would you like to be the new manager of this store?" The question echoed in her head. Impossible. Surreal. She searched Walter's face, expecting some kind of jest, but there was none. He was serious, dead serious. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Just minutes ago she had been fired, humiliated in front of customers, treated like she was disposable, and now? Now she was being offered the very position of the man who had tried to break her. Her voice caught, and she swallowed hard, her pulse roaring in her ears. You want me to run this store?" Walter nodded, his expression unreadable but firm. "I wouldn't have said it if I didn't mean it." Naomi let out a breath, shaking her head slightly, still trying to process. "But I don't have management experience. I've never—" "You don't need experience to know how to treat people," Walter cut in smoothly. "You already have what matters most. Integrity, work ethic, and respect for the people around you. Everything else can be taught." He exhaled, his gaze softening just slightly. "Believe me, I've met enough so-called experienced managers in my time to know that a title doesn't make a leader. Character does. And from what I just saw, you've got more of that than most." Naomi felt her fingers tighten at her sides. It was too much, too fast. Her whole life she had fought for every scrap of respect, for every inch of space in a world that too often tried to shove her into the background, and now here was a man offering her a seat at the table, not out of pity, not as a token, but because he believed in her. It terrified her. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, barely above a whisper. "I mean, what if I fail?" Walter studied her carefully, then let out a quiet chuckle. "Then you get back up and try again," he said simply. "But something tells me you're not the kind of person who backs down easily." Naomi's throat tightened. No, she wasn't. She never had been. Still, doubt gnawed at the edges of her mind. She had spent her whole life proving herself to people like Hank, to people who had already decided what she was worth before she even opened her mouth. She had worked twice as hard, swallowed insults, endured slights disguised as company policy, and, despite all of it, she had never imagined herself here, standing at the edge of something so much bigger than she had ever dared to dream. Walter must have sensed her hesitation because he let out a small sigh, glancing around the store before turning back to her. "Listen, Naomi," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "You don't have to decide right this second, but I want you to really think about this. You have the potential to change things, to make this store better, to be the kind of leader this place actually needs." He paused, then added, You deserve this opportunity. The question is, do you believe that? Naomi felt her chest tighten. Did she? She had spent years convincing herself that she just needed to keep her head down, work hard, and wait for her moment. But what if this was her moment? What if this was the door that had been waiting for her all along? Her hands curled into fists, not out of anger but determination. She had always dreamed of running her own place one day, of being in charge, of building something that was hers. Maybe this wasn't a bakery, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, this was the first step. Slowly, she lifted her chin and met Walter's gaze. "I'll do it." The moment the words left her lips, Naomi felt something shift inside her, like a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying had finally lifted. Walter held her gaze for a long second, then nodded, a slow, satisfied smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Good," he said simply, as if he had expected nothing less. And just like that, her world changed. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Naomi stepped into her new role with the same determination that had carried her through every hardship before. But the transition wasn't easy. The first few days were filled with doubting glances from some of the employees, whispers that carried just beneath the surface, questions hanging in the air, unspoken but loud nonetheless. Her? The new manager? Some were supportive, but others, especially those who had been close to Hank, looked at her like she was an outsider who had somehow cheated her way in. She felt it every time she walked through the aisles, every time she gave an order or tried to introduce a new system to improve efficiency. The pressure was relentless, an invisible weight pressing against her shoulders, daring her to break. There were moments when she lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling of her tiny apartment, wondering if she had made a mistake. But then she remembered Walter's words. You don't have to have experience to know how to treat people. So that's exactly what she focused on. She made it a point to learn everyone's name, from the cashiers to the stockroom workers, to the janitors who cleaned the floors after hours. She listened, really listened to their concerns, their frustrations, the small but constant issues that had been overlooked by management before. She treated everyone with the respect she had fought so hard to earn for herself. Slowly, the tension in the store began to ease, and then something even more unexpected happened. One afternoon, as she was going over inventory reports in the back office, a knock sounded at the door. She looked up to see Luis, one of the older employees who had been working under Hank for years, standing there looking hesitant. He had never been outright rude to her, but he had kept his distance, watching with quiet skepticism. "Hey," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "just wanted to say I think you're doing a good job. Things feel different around here, in a good way." He paused, then smirked slightly. "Hank never used to ask what we thought about anything. It's nice to actually feel like our opinions matter." Naomi blinked, caught off guard. Then warmth spread through her chest and she smiled. Day by day, the store began to feel less like a battleground and more like a community. Morale improved, customer service got better, and sales even started to reflect the shift. Walter stopped by often, always watching with that quiet, knowing look, never saying much, but his presence alone was enough to remind Naomi that she had someone in her corner. But the biggest change came when she met Walter's daughter, Eleanor Reynolds. Naomi had heard the name before. Eleanor was one of the most respected pastry chefs in the city, a woman whose bakeries were known for their artistry and perfection. She had trained under world-renowned chefs, written best-selling cookbooks, and even made appearances on televised cooking shows. So when Walter introduced them one afternoon, Naomi could barely believe it. "My father speaks highly of you," Eleanor had said, her sharp blue eyes studying Naomi carefully. "Says you've got talent, says you've got a dream." Naomi swallowed hard, nodding. "I do." Eleanor tilted her head, as if assessing her. Then, after a long pause, she said, "Show me." And just like that, Naomi found herself in one of Eleanor's private kitchens, standing before a gleaming marble counter, her hands trembling slightly as she rolled out dough under the scrutiny of one of the most accomplished pastry chefs she had ever met. The training wasn't easy. Eleanor was tough, demanding, and utterly relentless. She corrected every small mistake, pushed Naomi harder than she had ever been pushed before. But she also taught, really taught. She didn't just show Naomi how to bake. She showed her how to perfect, how to elevate, how to make every detail matter. Over time, the fear Naomi had initially felt turned into something else. She spent months under Eleanor's guidance, balancing her responsibilities at Green Mart with long nights in the kitchen, and slowly, piece by piece, her dreams started to feel tangible, real. She saved every extra penny, worked tirelessly on her craft, and with Eleanor's connections and mentorship, the impossible began to look possible. And then, 1 year later, it finally happened. With Walter's support, Eleanor's training, and a small business loan she had fought tooth and nail to secure, Naomi's bakery opened its doors for the first time. It was a small shop tucked between two larger storefronts, but the moment she flipped the open sign, she knew this was hers. The scent of cinnamon and fresh bread filled the air. The glass display case gleamed under the warm light, and as customers trickled in, curiosity turning to delight as they tasted her creations, Naomi felt something she hadn't in a long time. She had made it. Eleanor was there on the first day, standing near the counter with Walter beside her, watching with quiet satisfaction. When Naomi finally took a break, Eleanor handed her a small handwritten notebook. Naomi turned it over in her hands, brow furrowing. Eleanor smirked slightly. "It's every family recipe I've ever perfected. Consider it an investment." Naomi swallowed hard, emotion tightening her throat. She looked between Eleanor and Walter, understanding for the first time just how much they had given her, not just opportunity, but belief. "Thank you," she whispered. Walter simply nodded, and Eleanor, ever the mentor, merely said, "Don't screw it up." Naomi let out a breathless laugh, and as she looked around her bustling little bakery, the place she had dreamed of for so long, she knew that this was only the beginning. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.